Right, teacher Mr. Loria. This is second lecture on Unbearable Lightness of Being. Hope to talk about love versus sex, the effect of language, and fate versus freedom in this lecture. So let's talk about love versus sex, and what is the difference between sex, the raw act of sex, and like making love. Right, think about that for a second. Um, right? Let's look. I'm looking at page 15. It says Tomas came to this conclusion, right? The love does not make itself felt in the desire for copulation. The desire extends to an infinite number of women, but in the desire for shared sleep. The desire limited to one woman. What he means is what he wants to have sex with like everyone he sees. He doesn't necessarily want to sleep with them and wake up next to them. That's slightly more intimate. So he's pretty good at avoiding this. He says, I have insomnia, blah, 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 blah. Like he's figured out a way around that in most situations. So that's just something that he does, which brings us to Teresa versus Sabrina, two very different characters who share the common thread of Tomas. He does like to sleep with both, obviously, but he marries, or his second wife would be Teresa. We don't know much of his first wife. It's also interesting. We don't really know how he met Sabrina. She's just present. Like she's already a part of his life. Whereas like meeting Teresa is very explicit and very like, they both break it down very differently. We'll get to that versus fate, freedom, and all that. Point three, but worth bearing in mind right now. When she sleeps with him, she kind of clutches his hand like she needs him. She also got sick when she first arrived, right? So he kind of feels sorry for her. He feels bad, and it's birthed like out of that, um, you know, and like their love is. There's an interesting point where, um, you know, after she visits her a week and she goes back, he's like, "Do I invite her again?" Right? And he just thinks, "Do I want her to come or not?" And he stands there and he thinks about it a lot, and maybe he understands that if he does, that life is going to be very different. Um, but he feels a little bit sorry for her, and um, it's an interesting point, right? It was simply the hysteria of a man who, aware deep down of his inaptitude for love, felt the self-deluding need to simulate it. That's pretty intense, right? So anyway, there's a difference between love and sex, and that's explored, throughout this novel. Let's talk about compassion versus co-feeling, and this is the chapter that starts off. Um, yeah, here we go. Chapter 9. All languages derived from Latin form the word compassion by combining the prefix com with the root suffering, right? English would be one of those languages. And in other languages, in Czech, which is the language of the author, right? It means, instead of co suffering, it means co feeling, right? And it's a very different kind of love, or it's a very different effect, right? Because you can think of it too with like pathos, ethos, and logos. Um, Pathos, like empathy, by the way, derives from this same concept, but it does imply that you're a little bit higher up than that the person that you take pity on. So it's an interesting kind of love. So what he's saying is, when you think of compassion, if you are one of these Latin-based languages, you think, you have to be like, you're up here, she's down there, or he or whoever, right? And you feel bad for them, and that's not quite the same as like feeling with them for like whatever moment that they're in. He says to love someone out of compassion means not really to love. Whereas co-feeling, right? If you feel with them, then that's the ultimate kind of love, and it's not just you don't feel bad for them in certain moments. You share their relation, you share their you know status quo moments. Like it's an interesting point. So the effect of language, um, you know, is interesting. Um, in how humans act and how we behave. Uh, you know, the Spaniards. My family's a Spanish background, right? This room has all these back there like diplomas from Medellin and from, you know, University of Pennsylvania and stuff from my family. But right, sometimes I think of the Spaniards. It's not, they wrote a lot of poems. They didn't exactly design too much stuff, right? You look at Germans, right? Germanic language is very much more like boom, 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 boom. They're like engineers, right? So the effect, language has an effect on your thinking, and I think he's pointing that out there. Let's talk too about. Notice I'm kind of just brushing over completely like the plot and more explaining the things behind it, the overarching ideas. But there is one moment that I want to mention, and that's when when Tomas goes and visits, you know, visits the studio, yeah, in Prague. No. Anyway, yeah, Zurich. Where are they? Right, it's during the war. They leave for a little bit, yeah, and he meets up with Sabrina, and she answers the door just wearing her that hat that she has, um, yeah, and her, you know, evening attire and a hat. Pretty sexy moment, right? That'd be cool. And suddenly realizing he was touched, he removed it. Right, they made love without saying a word. So it's interesting to think about, you know, that kind of very stark moment of Sabrina. Contrast that to Teresa, who like shows up with the book, you know, like um, yearns for something higher. They make a big point of that, right? She wants something higher. She wants this other thing in her life. Um, when she leaves and goes back to Switzerland, or sorry, Czechoslovakia, and Tomas realizes I have to go back, and if I go back, there's no coming back here. Like I've been rescued into Switzerland, but I'm out of here, right? And and it's very interesting. He only realizes he loves her once she's gone, which again, like, is an interesting point. Um, he was enjoying the sweet lightness of his being. So at first he's like, "Whoa, this is cool. I'm a bachelor again, woohoo!" And he's loving it. But then he goes, right, and that he changes his mind on that, right? Uh, that's gone, and then he's hit by the weight. So again, you start light, then you go weight, unbearable lightness, right? He decides that he has to go back, and he eludes Beethoven, right? And this brings us to fate versus freedom, right? He eludes this Beethoven stanza, and it's, pardon my lack of German pronunciation, but muss Stein, right? Es muss Stein, it must be, and that's kind of like fate, by the way. And right, and like, so Teresa kind of sees meeting Tomas in the cafe as like fate, this beautiful moment. He sees it as just kind of coincidence, um, you know, but when he alludes Beethoven, like, yeah, this is the way it has to be. There's fate, and then there's freedom. Um, you know, let's see, and then they get into chapter 16. Beethoven apparently viewed weight as something positive. She's going back to that other binary setup, right? What is positive, what's negative. We talked about that before. Let's see. It must be, right? I have to do this. It's just kind of fate. When he goes back, you know, it's brilliant, I think, at the end of 16. He sees her and he's like, oh, crap, right? This just happened. He fancies himself standing opposite her in the midst of a snowy plain, the two of them shivering from the cold. If that's what you're picturing when you are reunited with, the person that you love, ouch. That's a very like, oh shit moment. That moment actually reminded me of On the Road when when he breaks up with that Mexican chick and they're like, love's a duel, And in certain moments it feels like that, right? And that's kind of a cynical view to take of love, but he then gets into, right? This is that happened. There's that this is one of the last paragraphs in this section where it's like he happened. 7 little combinations of things resulted in him having met her. And the opposite of saying it must be is, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, the German part, but it could just as well be otherwise. I'll try the German. Ist ganz anders sein. How did I do? Germans. Anyway, it could have been otherwise. What that means is it was just random, right? So there's either fate or you're like, and everything's gonna happen, or you're free, and it's randomness. It reminds me of Jimmy World. There's a quote there. Could it be that everything goes around by chance, or only one way that it was always meant to be, right? Freedom or fate. Are you free to make your own choices? So interesting section. A lot about love versus sex. A lot about the effect of language, compassion versus feeling. Some brilliant moments with the two female characters, and then this big question: does fate? It must be, or freedom? It could have been any otherwise. I just happened to go that route. So think on that. And again, one of the interesting parts about this book, when you're faced with binary, you're gonna have some characters who act one way, other characters act a different way. So I guess your homework, think about Teresa, right, and Tomas. How do they view their relationship? I think one of the characters use it as this very profound, very deep, like this was always meant to be. The other one's like, it kind of just happened. So anyway, I'll see y'all next time.